I take this time to urge my colleagues to support S-316. I congratulate and thank Senator Kaine and Young for their leadership on this issue. It will give us an opportunity to finally repeal the 1991 and the 2002 authorization for the use of military force in regards to Iraq. We are not at war with Iraq. And we have seen, particularly with the use of the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, which was centered on Afghanistan, that it can be used by administrations well beyond the intent of Congress. So it's our congressional responsibility to remove these authorizations and to finally repeal them. I want to make it clear, I voted against both of the Iraq authorizations when I was in the House of Representatives in 1991 and 2002. The 2002 particularly was passed by false pretenses. It was passed because of the belief that Iraq was involved in the attack on our country on September the 11th, when in fact they were not. It was based on the fact that they had weapons of mass destruction that could be used against U.S. interests, and that was also false. Today, the U.S. forces in Iraq are there by the invitation of the government. There is no need for Congress to authorize the use of military force in regards to Iraq. If there are any issues in regards to protecting U.S. interests that may fall within Iraq that would require the use of the President of military, he has that authority under Article 2 of the Constitution, and he also has the authority given to him by the War Powers Act to utilize that process if, in fact, it is needed. It's Congress's responsibility to declare war, clearly in the Constitution of the United States. It's our responsibility to authorize when our men and women should be put in harm's way. We have a responsibility to make sure that the authorizations for the use of that force are in compliance with our security needs, and clearly we need to eliminate the authorizations that we passed in 1991 and 2002, and we're going to have the opportunity to do that. It's very important that we pass those bills. It clearly, when I said earlier, could be used by a future administration, by a president, to go well beyond the intent of Congress. Maybe 5 or 10 years from now, a creative use of that authorization could be used to introduce troops where clearly against the intent of Congress. Now, why do I say that? Because it's happened before. Let me give you a case in point. The 2001 authorization for the use of military force, which was passed shortly after the attack on our country on September the 11th, 2001, was aimed at going after the organizations in Afghanistan that were responsible for the attack on our country. So let me, if I might, read into the record the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, because I think members of the Senate and certainly the public would be very surprised to see the specific language that was used in 2001 and how it's been misused by 4 administrations. It states that the President is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determined planned, authorized, committed, and aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September the 11th, 2001. That's the language of the AUMF. And yet we have seen that being used now by 4 presidents, far beyond the intent in Congress. They're using them in countries against organizations that didn't even exist in 2001. It's been used in Yemen and Somalia, far from Afghanistan. Presidents have used the 2001 authorization in places and against organizations that we never imagined 22 years ago. Now, I've heard some of my colleagues say, well, these are affiliates of organizations that existed in 2001. Well, the concept of affiliate is nowhere in the authorization of use of military force that Congress passed. It was used by legal counsel and administrations to justify the use of force. It's our responsibility to give that authority, and we didn't, and yet presidents are using this to justify the use of force. Presidents have used the 2001 authorizations in places and against organizations never imagined by Congress. The notice under the War Powers Act has been given to over 20 countries using the 2001 authorization. And military activities have been used well beyond Afghanistan under that authority in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and Niger. Never intended by Congress. Congress needs to pass S-316. Let me make that clear. We need to get that bill passed to take off the books the Iraq authorizations that we have. And then we need to repeal and replace the 2001 AUMF. It's our responsibility. President Biden agrees. Let me just quote from the President's statement in support of S-316. He says, furthermore, President Biden remains committed to working with Congress to ensure that the outdated authorizations for the use of military force are replaced with a narrow and specific framework more appropriate to protecting Americans from the modern terrorist threats. Towards that end, the administration will ensure that Congress has a clear and thorough understanding of the effect of any such action and of the threats facing U.S. forces, personnel, and interests around the world. Chairman Menendez has also indicated, and Senator Kaine have also indicated and understand that we first must pass S-316, and then we need to take up the 2001 authorization for repeal and replacement. I will introduce legislation in the very near future that does exactly that gives us the opportunity to carry out our responsibilities. I've done this in previous Congresses. It will sunset the 2001 authorization with enough lead time for the administration and Congress to pass, as President Biden has said, a narrow and specific framework more appropriate to protecting Americans from modern terrorist threats. That's our responsibility to do that. We must take action on all fronts. Repeal the authorization that was passed in 1991 and 2002 related to Iraq, and then move with dispatch to repeal and replace the 2001 authorization that was aimed mainly towards Afghanistan. With that, Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.